Hi everyone, welcome. So before we start, I just want to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to elders past and present on my behalf and Nick's. Welcome to How to Sell Out, the art of merchandising as an indie developer. And I will find my mouse one day.
It's fine.
Or I won't.
Cool. So we'll just introduce ourselves and where we're from. So me and Meredith from different companies, obviously. I'm the managing director at Samurai Punk. I've been with the company since we started. I co-founded it back in 2014. I used to be our artist, and I've now transitioned into a business role, handling things like merchandise, but also our events and PR, that kind of thing for the studio going forward. So if you don't know, the company is known for its game Screen Sheet, The American Dream, and soon to be Feather, and a bunch of other small stuff. Some notes about our company. If you know our games, we actually don't have very strong internal IPs. Like, our games are successful-ish, but we're actually sometimes, by a lot of people, known better by our logo and by our brand. And that's part of what I'll be speaking about, because we're a very apparel-focused company in terms of merchandise, which is odd, I know, at a games conference to talk about.
Hi, so I'm Meredith. We kept it on feet, and being that it's nearly the end of day one. So I'm Meredith, so my role at Ultimerse is a combination of production and a lot of business development, as well as managing marketing, etc. At times. We just got a new marketer on board, which is great. I was initially hired as the marketer, so a lot of the way that I shaped my understanding of the company was through that lens, and have spent a lot of time working throughout retail and different spaces that require you to think about visual merchandising, the way you sell, how you sell to people, that kind of informed a lot of this talk today. So I do things like manage our booth setups for events, our merchandising for events, ordering our merchandising, we're very lucky to have a very talented artistic team that creates really exciting bespoke merchandise. So working with them to make sure that we get really interesting merchandise and then get it to events. So Ultimerse, for us, we actually had a really strong IP in that the concept lent itself really well to merchandise. So you're a rookie firefighter in a town made entirely out of paper, so things go exactly as you would expect, super well. But it meant that we could focus on coming up with some core items that were more classic and more standard, that we see a lot for indies, and then also kind of more left of centre items, which we'll go into a little bit later. We wanted to grow a secondary revenue stream that was outside of just the games we were making and look at digital and physical products that we could potentially market to our audience. And obviously, with any merchandising, there's brand recognition that can come with it, and free, that should have quotation marks, marketing. So is it worth it? And if that gets stuck in your head the rest of the song, it's not on me. And it is a lot of work. It is a huge amount of work to get involved in merchandising, especially when you're early as an indie. You're in those really, really fresh stages and you're like, is this something I should even be thinking about? Is this something I should be involved in? Or am I going to waste a huge amount of money and time? The reality is that the work speaks to the return. So you can choose to invest as much time and or money, or as little as you would like, and it will probably speak to the sort of return you get. So you could look at working with a company like Redbubble or T-Fury, where you're providing your designs and then they take a cut. Or you can spend a lot of time and potentially make a lot of revenue with custom designs, finding different merchandisers for different products and so on. You can see up there, there are some figures of the amount of money that can come through in your actual merchandising, and especially for Snowman Studios, so those that did Altos Adventure. When they put a merch store into their game, it resulted in them making 60% of their annual revenue in 30 days from product sales. And we'll dive into that a little more deeply later. Oh, but I'm just an indie. Nobody cares about me or my game or what I'm creating. And you might be right, that there is a very high possibility that you are very, very early and no one really knows what you're creating. But you don't necessarily need a hit to sell really good things. If you think about it as games merchandising, you might struggle. If you start to reframe that conversation into apparel and looking at what would be interesting to purchase or to have or to wear, people want to own things that make a statement about the kind of person that they are. And before your game comes out, people are still going to want to give you money. So if you can find a way to make that merch appealing to the niches, you're on the right track. You're giving fans a way to financially engage with you before your product even releases. Did that just run away? No, okay, good. I just did it on here. And also, people wearing shirts, walking billboards, and we like that. So when should you start? The biggest piece of advice is to listen to your community. I can hear some of you going, I don't have one, and I understand that. And that's where, if you're lacking in that community, trade shows can be a really good testing ground. If you're at a trade show, people are going to expect you to have something that they can take away. You're probably going to have business cards, but even doing something as simple and small as a really, really small run of items can give you a little bit of that legitimacy. You want to be examining studios at similar levels to you, so try and find studios that are exactly where you are in the trajectory. And it's always going to be a little bit different, but if you're really early and they're selling merchandise, what are they selling? Why are they selling it? Reach out to them, ask them how that looks. This equation here actually comes from someone named Heidi from Happy Worker. So they're a collectibles company that works with AAAs like Blizzard and huge, huge IPs to create merchandising, and has informed a lot of information in this talk. And so if you do have a larger community and you need to convince higher ups to do it, do the math. Let them see, hey, this is the potential revenue that we could have from going down this path. So Altos Adventure, is there anyone in the room that's not aware of Altos Adventure, the game? Okay, cool. So basically it's an endless runner style game with really, really beautiful art style. They put a lot of time and energy and love into the art style itself. And pretty much from release, they had people going, we want merch, we need merch, we have to have merch for this game, because they wanted a way to show their connection to that experience. So what they did is they waited, and they knew that the merch needed to be less IP specific, because other than, okay, well, you're going to now ski towards some llamas and we're going to find a way to make that purchasable, it's quite difficult. So they're very selective in their design and their concept. So really handmade feel. And it was all apparel style. If you look at anything up there, the only way you would know any of that merchandise was from the game is if you bought it through the website. If you saw someone walking around with that shirt with a llama on it, you'd be like, that's a cool llama. End of story. So you don't necessarily have to have the game's awareness to sell the merchandise or to want to buy the merchandise. They also had a really small selection, and they curated it through a Shopify platform to reduce that workload on themselves. Implementing it into the storefront of their game as well. That could be an entirely different talk, but it's also a really good thing to look at. And great revenue results. You want to sell out of items. You want a feeling of rarity and limited edition, because that allows people to feel like they're part of something special. And that is what people are looking for. I mean, we've all heard of retail therapy. There's always someone that's like, I just need to buy something and then I will feel great today. And that's really, really important to look at that when you're trying to come up with merchandising. So what's the actual user journey look like? So there are a number of different ways that people are going to find your merchandise or find your game as an indie. If you're in an event like PAX and you're showing, for example, if you're wearing a piece of merchandise, and every time we go to an event like PAX, you'll see people walking around wearing a shirt, and they're like, yeah, this is a shirt I'm wearing day one for PAX, because I know that I'm going to connect with these people and these sorts of people. It makes a statement about who you are and what you play, and it lends into this repeating circle of discovery for people, because not only does it create connections between them and the people that they meet, it reinforces their connection to your product. So it might be that someone finds a piece of merch online, especially if they're browsing a store like T-Fury or Redbubble, and they go, oh, that's a really cool design. Where did that come from? And then they find out that it came from a game. Then they might end up purchasing your game and coming back to purchase more merchandise. So try to think of it as they're almost two separate channels that reinforce each other. And obviously, there's a huge amount of marketing value in doing merchandising. So not only do you have the walking billboard purpose of people wearing clothes that have logos of your game or concepts or things that work really well in that field. We've already talked a little bit about on the way it increases engagement and the connection. But it's also really easy social content. So help out your marketer. If they have materials that they can push and that they can A/B test with their audience, that's a really beneficial way of knowing, is this something that's actually going to sell before you even go ahead with purchasing? It also increases your legitimacy. Having a store does make you seem relatively competent, reliable, or a true brand. There is an association that we put on, it's like there's a very small startup or there's a very small indie. And if you can look bigger than you potentially are, that can reflect really well in terms of your sales and revenue as well. And you can use it for competitions and drive traffic, if not an actual purchase in the end. What are you supposed to sell? So listen to your audience. So for Paperville, every time we posted an image of our Malk character, people went crazy. And the social posts always did really, really well. So we knew immediately, okay, so that's a piece of our game that is unique and that people respond to whether they know the game or not. How do we turn that into a purchasable product? And for us, it was really easy. It was like, people really, really like plushies. We're going to go down that road. If you're not sure what your USP is or what's the thing that people are going to turn to, what are people identifying or mentioning when you're demoing? What do they come out of the headset if they're in VR, like our games are? Or do they walk away and go, oh, I loved when XYZ happened? And how can you turn that into a product? So can it be commodified, essentially? Coming back to the unique sellable product, so obviously our game had a big fire concept. So when we did PAX last year, we actually did matches for press handouts. I promise you, I got approval with PAX. There's no one that's going to come and be like, how could you do this? But because our game was tongue-in-cheek, we wanted to play off that. And you can do the same thing with cheeky pins and shirts. Like we have a shirt of one of the milk characters giving the finger, essentially. And people are like, oh, that's adorable, it's giving a thumbs up. No, it's not. And do your research, like we've said before. So start small. Do small runs, small costs, and if you have the skills, attempt homemade. That is actually really, really a big draw for people if they feel like they're owning something that is very special and limited, and that they are the only one to have this exact version. So I'm not going to ask you all of these questions. I highly encourage you to take a photo of this slide. But these are questions that you do need to ask yourself because you are going to be in a position like myself where you're like, yep, we're ready. We know exactly, this merch is it. This is key. This is what we should be getting. And you're wrong, and that's fine. And you will learn, and you'll hear from our mistakes later. But you need to ask, why should anyone care? Would you want to buy it? Is it unique or is it interesting? What price are you going to sit it out? Are you going to mark it up for trade shows? Are you going to mark it down? What's the actual profit margin? You don't really want to have something where you're going to make 5 cents for every item because you're going to invest a huge amount of time and energy for very little return. And also, what's the context? So where you are, the weather, the social context, the religious context. What's the message of the item? And we'll come back to that later as well. Cool. Selling at trade shows.
So the question I have for everyone here is, who here is doing like at least 1 or 2 trade shows, like a PAX every year? Yeah, cool, same. We do like at least 2, especially overseas. How many of you are actually selling merch at those shows? Or selling something and making money while you're there? And how many of those are not just selling codes? Cool, okay. Okay, sweet. Sorry, I was like, I know what you're doing, it's fine. Ruined it. Yeah, so you can see like a large portion of you are spending a lot of money at these shows. And what we're trying to talk about with merch is it's not necessarily initially a big revenue stream. It's just a really good way to start offsetting your costs. We can be putting down, you know, to do an international show, like 10 to 15,000 Aussie just to do a small booth at a PAX West or a PAX East. They're super expensive. You got to fly people over there unless you have friends in the state who can help you out. You got to buy the booth. You got to set it all up. You got to sell. You got to like just show the game, and then maybe you've also hired a PR agent while you're there to help book the show and help get you a bunch of interviews. So you're a bunch of money in the hole just to go over and do one show. So what you need to start thinking about is, what can we be doing on the side that's going to help start clawing back those costs? We're not at a point as a business, we've been doing this for multiple years, where we're making profit on the show itself, but the merch itself is profitable at a show, and it's clawing back those costs by a large percentage. So, and the other thing you think about it is like, it's an additional stream of revenue while you're going through development. And you need to start thinking about how you can start pulling money out of the fans early. It's very cynical to think about it like that, but it's a thing you can do.
But they love owning the thing.
Yeah, they do love it. And well, we'll touch on it before, but they like to engage in the product early so they can be invested. And like you said, it'll remind them of the game going forward. Like we have people coming to our show. Again, we're not a game-centric merch company. We have people come to every single show. They buy a new shirt every time because they just like our shirts. And that might be because they don't own VR for our last game, or might be because they liked our previous game and they just want to support us going forward, even if they're not interested in any new games. And yeah, you can get a lot of money out of your hardcore fans who will buy everything you make. The other thing is that sometimes you'll have a fan who's played, so for our game, Screen Cheat, it's a lot of a huge audience, but a lot of them bought it on Humble, where we maybe made 30 cents or 50 cents out of that customer, but they've played 100 hours of the game, or they bought it for full price, which is still only 15 US, and they played hundreds of hours. So it's a way that you can get extra revenue out of them, but also turn them into this dedicated fan who's going to support you going forward. And they can support you with their wallet, but they can also support you with their marketing. Like Meredith said, someone who's wearing a shirt is generating conversation, and they're generating like visual value for you as a business.
Cool. So yeah, on the trade shows note, visual merchandising. So like we said before about looking bigger than you potentially are, it's really important to actually think about the layout of your storefront. Think of yourself like a store. Think of yourself as somewhere where people want to be. What's the energy of the space? You need to research storefronts, what works, what doesn't, and think for yourself what attracts you to buy a product or to walk into a store or to walk up to something. At events like PAX's, you're not necessarily going to have a huge amount of space to work with, and you're competing against a huge number of other valuable spaces. So you need to be ready to think critically about that. You want to be visually appealing. If you look like you're a big star, people will usually treat you like one, and they're going to be more willing to spend the money on you if you look legitimate and you look like you know what you are doing. Take FPOS. People, and I say people and I mean me, don't necessarily carry cash anymore. I am terrible with carrying cash, and if I am at an event like PAX, I probably won't take any out beforehand, and you don't want that to be the tipping point of why someone does or doesn't buy your merchandise. Have a digital till and train your team in it. So we use something called Square, which some of you might be familiar with. Make it as easy as possible as it can be, both for your team to sell and for people to purchase. And often pick members of your team with retail experience and get them in the forefront of those conversations. They're going to be used to having to talk to people that they maybe necessarily don't know very well, and to actually have a conversation about a product or drive a sale. Now, something I want to talk about a little bit is the idea of the anchor price, and some of you might have seen this extra credits video on it, but anytime you price an item or price a piece of merchandise, you're giving it an inherent value, and you're saying to an individual, this thing is worth this many dollars. And you have to be really careful with where you place that price, because what will happen is if you price something at $20 and then you mark it down to $7, someone that was never going to spend $20 and also never going to spend $7 might be more likely to look at it and go, that is a bargain, I just saved $13, and be far more willing to purchase it even if they never touch it. And this happens a lot with, I'm sure all of you in here can relate, Steam sales, where you will go and you will buy a huge amount of games and you'll be like, this is amazing, I got this game for 87.3% off. I'm a champion, and you never touch it. But what's happened there is the anchor price has been set, and the value of that item has been set, and then it's been changed. And this is really useful at trade shows because you can price quite high where people are expecting to spend money and discount relatively slow. So day one, you can go in and say, yep, this thing is worth $30 or $40, and then go, okay, so some people are feeling like that's really overpriced, or this doesn't feel like the right fit, or we're not selling as fast as we think. You can immediately make a decision to drop that price down. But it is a balance, and you need to walk the line. Don't overprice, but you want to make sure those discounts seem like a really good deal. Bundles as well, final day sales, fire sales. You want to sell out everything, but not at the expense of any potential profit. So that's important to remember. Another thing to think about is the Goldilocks effect. So you want to maximize your sales by tiering items. And you'll see this all the time in games with, you'll have a base edition, and then you'll have a collector's edition, and then you'll have the extreme edition that comes with like a human head or something. And that's something that we see a lot as well in general retail. So if you think of iPhones, there's always the bottom tier and the top tier. And it actually plays into a psychological trait that we have where there is a desire to avoid extremes. So we never want to feel like, oh my gosh, that's way too much money. I couldn't do that. And, oh no, that seems a little cheap. This seems perfect. So you want to benefit your consumers by giving them that feeling of choice when they walk up to a booth. So some people are never going to spend more than a certain amount, and others are there to splash cash. So the difference can often be that emotional connection to your game or brand. So give them as many options as possible for them to land where they feel comfortable. And then you can see there's an example of it with what you might be selling at a booth. So you might have something that's relatively affordable, that's a small item that they can walk away with and be like, this is really great and cute and a nice piece of merchandise, all the way up to something that's much more luxurious.
Cool, so I'm going to start talking about all the super exciting things that come with starting to get really big. So we've been doing this for Samurai Punk's been 5 years old, and we've been doing merch seriously for about 2 years. Once you start going overseas, you either have to start dodging tax or doing it legitimately. I won't say which one we've done, or used to do. So the reality is, the US is a really good example. They have state level tax. So you have to either find a partner overseas who can handle that for you, or figure it out yourself, which is even scarier. And the other thing is, for example, taking credit card transactions overseas can be quite hard. That's another reason to find a partner, because you need someone to proxy those credit transactions through in order to get the money back to Australia legally. That's just a big thing. Because for example, using Square Australia, Square lets you do credit card transactions in Australia for a very small fee. But if you have the same account, you take it overseas, you need to have a local tax ID to do it. So, for example, our distributor also acts as our credit card proxy. And they also handle our tax for us, which is a really big benefit of what we're doing now, which is moving forward into sort of more global distribution. And another thing you'll start running into when you start doing trade shows overseas is stocking issues. If anyone has done merch for their trade shows and has tried to take 6 suitcases worth of t-shirts over to Seattle, and then you print a bunch and you bring them all back, that's insane. By the way, don't do that. We did that for 2 years. But then you can also start becoming, you start falling between a rock and a hard place, where when you start working with a distributor in the US or in Japan or in Germany, wherever you're doing your shows, I'm just railing off the big ones, you will start incurring a lot of fees. So for example, we're now at a point where we have to fight between printing all of our stuff in the US, storing it in the US, and then shipping it to trade shows in order to get it there, because that means we don't have to bring it over in suitcases. But then there's a big cost on the warehousing fees in getting it to the show. You have to pay this thing called drayage. In certain shows, it's really awful. It's thousands of dollars sometimes. And then you also, and then you'll have to pay a fee to your distributor just to take the credit card transactions, like I mentioned before. The upside is that you can start bringing your stock orders up, bring the unit cost down, and get your margins across the board way, way down. Because if you're printing for a show where you expect to sell out, you're printing maybe 50 of a shirt. If you do that, you're expecting maybe a 25% margin at best on a shirt. Whereas what we can do now is we can print hundreds of a single shirt, stock it in the US, and then send just a small amount to the show, and we're seeing a much higher margin per item. And we can start to do weirder things, like we have skateboards. Trev, do you have yours on you? Like, you can do vanity items like skateboards because they're heavy, but once you're doing domestic shipping, you're already paying a lot just to ship it. Heavy things don't really matter anymore, and you can start doing weird items that are really brand specific. So for example, Samurai Punk kind of made sense to do a skateboard. Yeah, ultimately, and this is the tactical way you do it when you're young, is you print everything, ship it to your Airbnb or your hotel, you hope that you sell out. As you do more shows, you start to know how much you can sell, and you can actually get pretty much on the line where you'll end up selling out, not taking much home, and not having to deal with a lot of shipping. And it keeps the cost way down, but like I said, your unit costs get pretty high. If anyone's here tried to print a screen printed t-shirt and try to do less than 100, you're like not going to make any money on that shirt. So some of the stuff we've encountered as we go bigger as a business, you end up in situations where you have so much stock that your booth is overflowing with different designs. We actually have, we're going to have 8 t-shirt designs at PAX Oz this year. I have no idea how we're displaying them. Meredith is the one who knows how to make things look pretty. We're kind of just like scrappy, but weird and different. It's a tricky thing. So I mentioned before all the issues with moving all that stock. And this is a thing that evolves day to day for our business and should be the same for you. You need to really take a hard look at what you can afford, because we talk about merch being a way to offset costs, but it's like you said, it's also a marketing benefit. So when you're small, taking a loss or breaking even on merch is actually still really big, because it helps generate those hardcore fans. It helps bring back retention on the fans. And it also helps market the game during the show and post the show. Whereas going forward, you can actually start to see it as more of a real revenue stream that can offset costs for shows as you do more and more and more. This is an area that I think you touched on briefly, which is selling merchandise online. Online is a really tough market if you aren't specialized in this area. We have been, for the longest time, a very trade show-oriented business. That's what we're experts in now at this point, and we know what we can sell there. Online is a whole different ballgame. So I can talk to you a little bit about what we're doing wrong, what I think we're doing wrong, and what you need to start considering. the big considerations when you're starting to talk online is, are you doing print-on-demand orders, or are you stocking the actual goods? So when I say stocking, you need to find someone who will distribute stuff globally. That could be you. You could actually just print a shit ton of stuff, bring it to your office or bring it to your home, and then when someone makes an order, you ship it out to them manually. For us, we have our distributor who does that, but they're taking a cut. But it means we can increase our unit orders, bringing the cost down. So it is really a balance. Whereas things like Printful, Teespring, T-Fury, Redbubble, there's a bunch of them. They have really good options. You can get lots of variety. You can print pretty much anything, anywhere. They generally have pretty good global shipping rates, but you're going to be seeing a much lower margin per item. So it's about what you're doing. So if you're only moving, two items or 5 items or 10 items a month even, you basically should stick to something that's print on demand, because you need to avoid putting yourself in the bank because you ordered 200 shirts that no one's buying. I know a lot of indies have gone through this. We have a bunch of mistakes we've made that I'll show later. But overstocking can be a big issue, so you need to be very careful as you're starting up. But for someone who's more experienced, if you have a game that's already hugely successful, you can start to wind up pretty quickly, because you can capitalize on your fans and help them engage with the game or with the brand itself. The other weird things you can run into is you can often have legal issues of what you can and can't ship or sell. 2 really good examples. There's a cotton import duty tax to Canada for some reason from the US. So for example, if someone in Canada buys a shirt from IndieBox, which is our distributor, and then it goes to Canada, they have to pay like $20 just to get it into the country. The only way to avoid that for them would be obviously just to illegally take it over on like a plane or something, which you'll imagine a lot of people from Canada are going to US PAXs, they buy things at trade shows, they take them home, that's no big deal. This is something I actually recently only found out. But it's a strange, issue of trade tariffs. The other thing is, we have American Dream box copies. It was only ever distributed in Europe, which means it only has a European rating. We would love to give our North American fans access to it, as it's a region-free product, but because we don't have an ESRB boxed rating, it would be probably illegal to sell it online and send it to them. Basically my distributor doesn't want to do it, and I don't want to push the limits. We already do enough weird stuff anyway. Talking about just selling out and trying to move stuff online, the biggest concern we have going forward is we sell on IndieBox's website, it's not on our website. This hurts your brand long term. It's something we want to move away from, but it's bringing our costs down. So by doing it like this, we're trade show focused only right now, the stuff that's online is basically just for the occasional sale. And it means it's cheaper for us. If we don't move this over to our site, we have to incur a huge monthly fee just to do that, which wouldn't be justified by our current turnover. But if it's on your site and you're using print-on-demand services, that's something you're actually able to do. So it's, again, finding out what works for you and at the scale and what sort of community and fan base you have. I mentioned just getting it out there. Usually, if you have an established game or an established brand, you need to take advantage of everything you have. If you have a big Twitter following, Discord group, Discord's amazing, by the way. If you aren't using Discord, you should have one. Like Snapchat, Instagram, wherever you're big, use that. Especially if you're in apparel, actually. Instagram is the place to be doing it and to be promoting it. If you aren't, you should be. We should be. We're not. We don't have the time. But yeah, take advantage of the channels you have access to, even if that's a blog that you write regularly and actually gets a lot of traffic. Once you promote to your fans, you can start looking elsewhere and considering new markets. So for example, we're actually looking at taking our shirts just to an anime convention because we have cool stuff and people are just buying it because it's cool, not because they know who we are. No one knows who we are. We've been operating for about 5 years and we have not really any real successes under our belt. So we're thinking if people at PAXs are buying our stuff because they just like it, I think we can get away with just going to an anime convention and selling a bunch of shirts. Because we have all this extra stock left over all the time, so we should try that. So yeah, try different avenues to try and move units if you have stock, or just taking advantage of whatever channels you have access to. Another thing we've been doing recently, actually, is because we have a distributor who we can easily just say, hey, my friends over there, they have a bunch of followers on their Instagram or on their Twitter. Can you just send them 2 shirts? Here's their address, and they'll just post it over there. We incur a small shipping fee for them, and then they'll basically pretty much without fail, I don't have to tell them, the box arrives, they open up the shirts and they take a photo with it and post it. You should, if you have stuff online already and you're able to do that, do that. If you have friends overseas, if you have friends with followings, take advantage of your friends and take advantage. The second I said it, I told you I was going to have this the cynical part of this talk. Take advantage of what you have access to, and if people like your stuff, I was going to say use them.
This is taking a turn. I like it.
Let them help you, really. And another thing online that we're not doing enough of is a lot of things that we don't do enough of because we don't sell much online. Raise your prices and then do a lot of sales. This is a lot about anchoring. If you sell stuff at $40 a unit, constantly have it on sale for 20 because that's actually how much you're going to sell it for, and you'll just get more sales. This is the same for Steam, right? If you're not doing super well on Steam, a good idea is to make sure your base price is high and just constantly discount because you'll just move more units that way. Meredith before mentioned knowing your market. Do you want to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, we've got a couple that we share here. So these kind of lend into common mistakes-ish.
Yeah.
But for example, so when we went to PAX East earlier in the year, we knew that while we were over there, it was going to be winter in the States. So when we were coming up with our merchandise, we decided that we were going to do beanies because obviously it's going to be super cold. There would be no point doing that for an Australian PAX because the second that we bring those beanies along, everyone's going to be like, it's 40 degrees outside, what's wrong with you? So not only will we seem really unhinged, but it's not going to sell. So that was something that we picked up on. But also think about your game's context and let that inform the merchandise. If you're doing a game that is all about music, why aren't you looking at things like guitar picks? That's a really small, simple item that has a really clear takeaway and makes it seem more unique and on brand. I've always been a big fan of the skateboards that Samurai Punk do because it's something that is really eye-catching and attention-grabbing. And even if people walk over and don't want to buy the skateboard, they'll usually end up looking at the rest of the merchandise. So it comes back to that tier again. For us at PAX East as well, we were like, oh, great idea, we're going to do bottle opener key rings. So it's a key ring with a cute design, and then on the back, it's a bottle opener. What we didn't realise is that in the States, nearly every single drink and beer comes in a can style or a twist bottle, and none of their drinks are open with bottle openers. So the amount of people that walked in were like, these are cool, they're bottle openers. I'd never use that. And we were like, oh, great. But now we have them for PAX Oz. And I'm sure you can understand that that's going to work really, really well. So keeping those things in mind, and I know you have some examples here as well.
So another really strange one is, has anyone done a trade show in Asia or specifically, my reference point is Korea before? So we have all these stickers. As anyone doesn't know, you can't really give away stickers at trade shows because there's often either the building or PAX themselves, I don't really know, have rules. Big fines, don't sell stickers, or don't give away stickers. You can sell them. But yeah, so we have thousands of these stickers that we at one point printed, then found out we couldn't give away. So I've just been, anyone's been to my office before, I give you stickers as when you come in. But I took them with me to Korea because I was like, oh, I'm doing this small show. I only have what I can fit in my backpack. Let's see what I can get rid of. And I wasn't trying to sell them. I just wanted to give them out to people. Really weirdly, a lot of people would grab the sticker because we had a clear, there's one design for the back of a laptop. They would take the sticker and put it on their arm and be like, what's going on? Because they thought it was a temporary tattoo. So very weirdly, a bunch of other booths had them, and I was like, oh, it's culturally, obviously, a lot of, Japan and Korea, they have a lot of history with tattoos, and as a result, temporary tattoos are actually very popular as a promo item. So this doesn't lead directly into purchasable merch, but a lot of you might give away flyers. Think about how much longer that temporary tattoo is going to last than a flyer that you give them and it's just going to go in their bag. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if you tried this at PAX, it would do pretty well. Just because they're cool and 90s.
Different.
What, put people in items?
Yeah, no, this
We just give away stuff basically. This is the same as sending stuff out. If you have friends when you're overseas or locally, just give them as much as you can.
Yeah.
You know the cost per item is something like $10 to $20 if it's a shirt, right? So you can just think of that as marketing spend. And once you've done that, the next day they're going to come back and they're going to be wearing that stuff. We do this for most of our friends because it just helps promote the brand. Even locally as developers who want to get new business, people know who we are locally as the people who make cool shirts. So that's another really effective way to just give out stuff or to promote locally.
Yeah, and on that note as well, let people see it on, because if you're at an event and you don't necessarily have the social channel where there's an image of someone wearing it, or if someone goes to your website and is trying to purchase it and it's just a flat lay, they're gonna be like, cool, that looks like a shirt that humans wear. The end. Giving people the opportunity to actually see how it sits and how it fits, is really important as well.
Yeah, definitely make sure if you have a bunch of staff running the booth, just make sure they're wearing the shirts, right?
Yep.
It also helps promote,
And then I think...
American Dream. So does anyone know about the American Dream? It's got a character in it called the Gunny. We thought since guns were political and the game has a baby Gunny in it, we decided to make plushies. Now I'm going to talk later very briefly about why that was also a mistake. But it was a fantastic promo item for the game because people were surprised. Turns out later Sacha Baron Cohen stole our idea for the Gunnimals in his recent thing. If you haven't looked up his new show, it's something. But yeah, so these were these very, I think, is that the first slide next? No, it's not.
It's early though.
Yeah, we can jump to it. So I'll talk about it there. So really quickly, we're going to go over a bunch of the common mistakes we've made. Actually, I think all of this is stuff we've fucked up at least once.
Personally done.
Yeah. And actually the inspiration for this talk. Bruh, what are you doing? So this is a really important thing, and this is when you're doing apparel especially. If you don't follow a lot of fashion manufacturers, especially really big ones, you don't know how to lay out a shirt or how to make something look good. The mistake we made initially, and a lot of people will make, is you just put the logo on a shirt. Pretty much, unless your logo has stood the test of time, you just can't do that. It's going to look like shit. Or, especially the biggest mistake we made was we put our logo on a shirt and then we used a crappy printing method, so it looked really, really bad. And this is before we did a rebrand as well. So like everything about this shirt is super dated. It didn't sell really well, which is what put us off. We actually didn't dive really hard into merchandise. The first time we did a shirt was because people had been asking us to print out and sell the shirts we were actually wearing during the shows, which were a different design. The reality was this one just didn't sell because it was ugly, and it was just like the game branding. Like, it was nothing special about it, and we hadn't put any time or love into it.
Don't brand by date, please. It can be really tempting to try and cut a corner on making something feel really limited and exciting and special and rare by being like, we're going to put a date on this thing and it's going to be like only for this period of time and that's going to be amazing. And I promise you it'll be amazing for about 5 minutes until you get the box home and you're like, what did I do? So make sure that when you are thinking about doing those limited items, make it limited in a different way. Just drop the date. It's not worth it. I'm not even going to go into more detail. Just trust me on this.
Yeah, that one actually applies to just like general branding at shows as well. Like, we've made the mistake, I'm sure some of you have as well, where you're like, oh, we're at PAX 2017. Let's put on the PAX 2017 branding, or let's put on just like the date. And then you realize your release date is now 9 months later. And you use the same banner at every show, so you have to just like scribble over it. And this is a really quick one. I'm just going to go over it. This is a bunch of like really simple guide, stuff that we've done in the past and we shouldn't do it again. These basically like high-risk, low-risk items. So what this comes down to is stuff that is cheap to print, you can do low runs of. That's a really important thing when you're trying new stuff, is stuff that anything you can do an incredibly low run of is good. Because if you don't know anything, it's better to just do a bunch of small, low-run orders of like a couple of stickers, a couple of badges, a couple of pins, see what does well for your game and for your brand, and then move forward from there. Otherwise, you end up in like the territory we do with the plushies, when you end up with a lot of them that you can't sell for two reasons. But you have high-risk items that some of you might have considered doing. So, for example, like hoodies compared to a T-shirt are like triple the cost usually for a good quality blank. And they're big and they're bulky, so you have a storage issue. They're more expensive, and they only sell them in cold climates. We sold them at PAX East very successfully, but we did a very low run, and our margin was terrible on them. So it proved that they work. Like I said, we did a small run. We're going to do them again, but we'll only ever sell them in cold climates. Things like snapbacks, plushies, penny arcade pins. I can talk to you about that afterwards. They're a trap. Sort of a trap. And figurines especially. Figurines is one of the weird ones where to print at a scale where you're going to make money on them, you have to print around 50 to 100,000 units. Because you're competing with people who make other figurines, and the manufacturers that make them are expecting these very high order runs. I got this from my friend at Clay. they were printing a series of 10 figurines, and in order to get the unit cost down to be competitive with another manufacturer, or another company selling competitive figurines, they had to print 10,000 of each design with a total order of 100,000. So you can imagine they were selling them for about $15, so they were probably like $6 each. So it's a lot of money. They can do that because they're so big. Some of you might not know, Clay is actually massive now. But, you know, for an indie, I would love personally to have some figurines for my games. But unless you're making them by hand or you're doing 3D printing and then painting them, it's a very expensive process. So speaking of the gunnies, I have 250 of these sitting in a warehouse. They're wasting money right now because multiple issues. Plushies are one of those really amazing items that I think is super compelling to fans. They're actually surprisingly cheap to print, but you have to do incredibly large runs to do them. This was a minimum order of 500, which I'm told is low. How low did you manage to get
We did
yours?
500.
You did 500? Yeah. So the normal companies will be offering you 1,000 to 2,000 to do a plushie minimum order. So as much as you all would love to do them, maybe don't, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of very bulky stock, not that heavy, but just massive boxes of these things. And the other mistake we made was we put them, so it was our first plushie, we had 500 of them. They sold quite well, but then we remembered they were tied to a game that was VR and was not going to be promoted for more than about a year and a half after its launch. So we don't really know what to do with them now. So if anyone wants some plushies...
That's been the whole purpose of this talk, is to actually bring the bag out like Oprah.
They're actually all in Florida, unfortunately. Because I was like, oh, I want some for PAX Oz. Yeah. But then I'm like, how much is it going to cost me to ship? Yeah. Maybe 50 plushies even back to PAX Oz to Australia. So yeah, they're tough items. And this is really the same for any stock order. This is big message was like, when you're first starting out, do not do big orders until you know the product is successful or you have a lot of friends. This is a little micro one, and this is why I mentioned print on demand being very good for new indies, especially ones that have really global presence. Our fans are actually, most of them are Australian, so our online fan base is Australian, but we have a lot of fans domestically at US shows, so we were stupid enough to think, if we get a US distributor, we're going to sell a bunch of stuff online to our American fans. Turns out we forgot that all of our online fan base is Australian for some reason. They are facing very high shipping fees, and they're facing the US dollar transaction just to get a product from us. So whenever we're at a show now, we basically have to offer a discount to Australian fans to make it justifiable for them to buy something online. Print-on-demand services, on the other hand, they will have the US or whatever currency you're working with, the fee, but the shipping won't be as bad because often they'll have more regional distribution centers and printing centers. So for example, someone like Printful can print in Asia, ship to Australia, and it won't cost nearly as much as going from the US. So that's a good way to get going and not screw up like we did. I mentioned rebranding. This is kind of something you need to be really honest with yourself on, and mentioning you're not Nintendo and your designs probably are not that good. I don't think our designs are that good anymore. We've been sitting with this new graphic. This is our core company logo, by the way, now on the right. You have to be ready to rebrand if you want to sell stuff that's cool, or is cute, or is nice looking, or something people are wanting to wear for a long time. We actually did the rebrand initially because we just thought our graphic design was ugly, and we worked with another illustrator to get that done. I'm still not happy with it, but this rebrand enabled us to print just the logo on a shirt, and people love it. This is the line art. Callum's wearing it now. Do you want to show? Do you want to?
Audience participation.
I was going to be like, stand up and show everyone. So this is a really simple shirt. Oh.
Hey.
It's an incredibly simple shirt. It's a single color. It's incredibly cheap to print, which is nice. If you all don't know about screen printing versus digital printing, I can tell you of the merits later. So it was a much more effective graphic design for us going forward, and it sold really well just as a shirt, but we can also have a really nice piece of graphic to put on our games on the top and just on business cards and things. So yeah, never be afraid to rebrand. I think this goes for any stage of production, any stage of your project, unless you're super established. Because I was talking to Clay, they are basically stuck with their logo now because they didn't rebrand early enough. Cool. Are we really that far in? Shit.
No, we're good.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah,
they were stuck with their branding, and as a result, they're kind of limited to the branding of their games and not able to just sell themselves as a company. And it's a missed opportunity because their logo is kind of old and ugly. is for you.
So I'm going to super zoom through this. But what do you do when you have an unhappy customer with online orders? It's very easy to be like, yeah, we'll start doing online and we're going to handle it all ourselves and it's going to be amazing. But the second that you get involved with refunds, exchanges, what you will and won't refund, consumer law as well. I don't know how aware people in this room are of Australian consumer law, but you should know it because you've probably gotten done a couple of times with things that you've purchased that you actually have coverage on, getting replaced or repaired. That coverage is usually up to about 2 years for refund or exchange, depending on the details. And if you are a business that is selling, you need to be on top of those things. Shipping delays, how do you make those things up to your consumers if something takes 3 months to get there and they're suddenly super pissed with you? If you have a bad experience, often a consumer can want to retake control. What happens if they turn around and they try and take it out on your game or what you're selling? So lost merchandise and how you recoup the costs from that, delivering on time internally versus externally, customer support and your team resourcing. Who in your team is going to sit down and be bagging all of these things for like 6 hours and just crying in a corner like as they get shorter and shorter because they're bagging all this stuff? It's really important that you think about those things early rather than later.
Cool. And finally, let's just talk about like what you need to do once you get started. If you're actually selling a lot of merch, a mistake we made very early and a lot of people will make is they don't keep an eye on what they're actually doing. This is the same for a lot of indies who don't do budgets, but the same goes for this. You should think about it as a separate business, as a separate entity. Its costs and its revenue and its profit are all separate, and try to quantify like, exactly what the outcome of all this merchandise is. Is it just a marketing activity, or is it actually a revenue stream for you? So it's very important to use the data you have access to. We both use Square as a business. It's a very useful tool at events. You can also, obviously, if you have an online store, you'll get data from that. You want to then correlate that data and do per show tracking and start to break down what's working for you, what's trending over time, like, and then like, you'll start to see trends in the data. For example, we found that if we did multiple designs of a t-shirt, we were selling more shirts overall. But if we just had 200 of one shirt, we wouldn't sell more shirts, right? So what we started to do is think about, okay, let's just get graphic designers who we know to do a bunch of different designs and see if we can just exponentially increase production of different designs and see how that works. And so far, it's been going very well. We're running now 8 designs at PAX Oz, so I'll tell you if this data changes. It might go up linearly like it looks like it's going to, or it might just sort of plateau because we're hitting a limited audience. And this is actually more true online. Having a lot of variety is really important because it gives people different ways to engage. Some people might come online just looking for a plushie, some, which, you know, don't do them, but some might be coming for like stickers, sticker sheets, or posters, which are cheap to do posters. Or they may be coming for a shirt or a shirt and copy of the game, right? So give people access to what they want because on print on demand or online, you can do a lot more. And this is something I made a lot of mistakes with at a lot of shows. You need to be very honest with yourself because if any of you have done trade shows and you've sold merch, especially if you take cash only, you often will come back with this big wad of money and you're like, I've made so much money. Like, because you feel rich, right? Because you do a show that costs as much as the money you've made back, maybe, which often happens. But then you start to think about, okay, I spent like this much on the booth. I spent a bunch on getting the stuff there and printing it. And I actually personally was there running the show plus my other 3 team members. How much was their time worth? How much was my time worth? How much time did we take in leave from the show because we're all tired afterwards? And then you get left with the result, which is generally the margin you have to actually start trying to increase. And like we said, you need to evaluate whether or not you're seeing just a pure marketing value from this merchandise or if you're actually seeing profit. And tracking the data is the way to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that is a very, very small level summary there. I know we are out of time as far as I can tell, being that it is the end of the day, but by all means, come up and have a chat to either one of us or reach out to us on Twitter. We're always happy to talk about this stuff and we could talk about it for ages. So, yeah, cool. I think we'll have to end it there. Thanks for coming.